The hidden safe opened, and our family fell apart. The safe door was still swinging when I dropped the grocery bags. I heard the thud of cans hitting hardwood, felt the cold air from the front hallway curl around my ankles, and stood there staring at a scene that made no sense. Papers everywhere. Jewelry boxes overturned and spilling their contents like small wounded things. My father's old revolver sitting on the dining room table like it had always belonged there and not locked away behind my mother's painting for the last 30 years. Owen was backing away from the wall, his hands up like a man trying to prove he hadn't touched anything, even though he clearly had touched everything. And Aunt Lorraine stood beside the open safe with a stack of yellowed documents pressed to her chest, her face the color of old ash. "Who opened it?" My voice came out harder than I intended, slicing through the room before I'd even made the decision to speak. Owen pointed at Lorraine. Lorraine shook her head, neither of them looked at me directly. "Someone answer me right now," I said. "Who opened the safe?" Lorraine's mouth moved without sound for a moment. Then she whispered the sentence that ended everything we thought we knew. "Your father had another family." The silence after those 5 words felt like something physical, like a hand pressing down on all 3 of us at once. I am Alina Vale, and I have spent most of my 34 years believing that if I just stayed organized enough, controlled enough, careful enough, I could hold things together by sheer force of will. When our mother got sick the first time, I made the schedules. When our father started forgetting things, I managed his medications and his appointments and his moods. And our mother died 3 weeks ago, and I stood at her graveside correcting the flower arrangements while Owen wept openly and Lorraine dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I told myself I was being strong. I told myself someone had to be. What I was actually doing, though I couldn't have admitted it then, was using other people's grief as a project so I wouldn't have to feel my own. That is my flaw, the one that threads through everything that followed like a vein of rot through old wood. I believe that control is the same thing as love. I believe that if I manage a situation perfectly enough, I can protect people from pain. I am almost always wrong. Owen is 29 and built entirely of defense mechanisms. He uses humor the way some people use armor, keeps everyone laughing so nobody notices the dents underneath. He spent his 20s moving between cities, between jobs, between girlfriends, racking up small disasters and explaining them away with charm. He has our father's easy smile and our mother's stubbornness, and a gambling habit he started calling a hobby 4 years ago. I love him the way you love a person who scares you a little because you can see exactly where they're headed and you can't make them turn around. The documents in Lorraine's hands told a story that went back nearly 20 years. Bank transfers to an account I didn't recognize. A deed for a small house in a suburb 2 hours away. Photographs of our father smiling in someone else's kitchen, someone else's yard, at someone else's birthday party. And letters, handwritten in his careful script, addressed to a woman named Carol Mercer and filled with the kind of tender, guilty language that people use when they are trying to apologize for things they haven't stopped doing yet. "There's a son," Lorraine said. She set the documents on the table with trembling hands. "His name is Gabriel, he's 32. This house, your father amended the deed 18 months ago. Gabriel Mercer is listed as a partial owner." Owen made a sound that was almost a laugh and then wasn't. "You're joking." "I'm not joking, Owen. You're standing there telling me that Dad had a whole other kid and then gave him our house." "Partial ownership," Lorraine said, as if the word partial made it smaller. I didn't say anything. I was looking at a photograph that had fallen from the stack, a picture of a man who looked exactly like our father would have looked if our father had been happy in a way none of us ever witnessed. He was standing in a backyard with a boy of maybe 12 or 13, both of them squinting into summer sunlight, both of them holding fishing rods. The boy had our father's jaw, his ears, the particular way he held his shoulders that I had always thought was just a veil thing. Then the front door opened. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing a gray jacket that was slightly too formal for grief and not formal enough for confrontation. He had a lawyer with him, a small, compact woman in a navy suit who carried a briefcase and wore the professional blankness of someone paid to feel nothing. Gabriel Mercer stood in the doorway of what had been my parents' home for 38 years, looked around at the papers and the overturned jewelry boxes and the revolver on the table, and said quietly, "I see you found the safe." "Get out of my house," I said. Alina, Lorraine said. I said get out. Gabriel didn't move. He looked at me with dark eyes that held something I wasn't ready to name yet, not hostility, not triumph, something much harder to dismiss than either of those things. "This is partly my house too," he said. "I didn't choose that, but it's true." His lawyer stepped forward and handed me a business card. "I'm Mina Torres. I'm handling probate on behalf of my client. We'd like to arrange a time to discuss the estate properly with everyone present. We're not here to cause a scene today." "You brought a lawyer to our mother's house 3 weeks after her funeral," Owen said. "That is a scene. That is the definition of a scene." "Owen," I said. "No, Alina, seriously. Not now." I looked at Gabriel Mercer for a long moment. He looked back. He did not look like a villain. He looked like a man who had been told something devastating 6 months ago and was still trying to figure out what to do with the information. That was the thing I couldn't stand. It would have been so much easier if he had looked greedy, if he had walked in sneering or demanding or cold. Instead, he looked like someone who was also grieving, and that made everything inside me lock up tight and hard because I could not afford to feel that. I could not afford to see him as a person with losses of his own. If I did that, the whole architecture of my anger had nowhere to stand. "Schedule the meeting," I said to his lawyer, "but until then, neither of you comes back to this property without notice." Gabriel nodded once. He glanced around the room one more time and his eyes paused on the photograph of the boy with the fishing rod that was still lying on the table. Something moved across his face. Then he turned and left with his lawyer, and the front door closed behind them, and I stood in the ruins of my parents' dining room trying to breathe. The weeks that followed were a special kind of madness that I organized into tasks because that was the only way I knew how to survive them. I hired a probate attorney, a man named Douglas Park who had the energy of someone who had seen every variety of human disaster and was mildly bored by all of them. I got the estate documents. I read everything twice, then 3 times. I made spreadsheets. I color-coded files. I built a wall of paper and procedure between myself and the fact that my father had loved another woman and another child for nearly 20 years while we were right there in the same house, eating dinner with him and watching television with him and believing we were his whole world. "You need to sleep," Owen told me one night, standing in the doorway of what had been our father's study, which I had taken over as a command center. "I'm fine. You've been in here for 6 hours. There are dark circles under your eyes that have their own dark circles. Owen, I need to understand every single document in this estate before the mediation. I need to know more than their lawyer knows." "Or," Owen said, dropping into the chair across from the desk, "you could accept that we might have to split the house with this guy and move on." I looked at him. "I am not splitting the house with him. Elena, I spent 12 years here taking care of Mom and Dad. 12 years. While you were in Seattle having your crisis and then in Portland having a different crisis and then wherever else you decided to go find yourself. I gave up my 20s to this house and this family, and I will not hand a piece of it to a stranger because Dad couldn't keep his personal life in order." Owen was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's not entirely fair." "Which part?" "The part where you make it sound like I abandoned everyone. I had my own problems, Alina." "You had your problems and I had everyone else's. That's how it worked." He left without answering. I went back to the documents. I started following Gabriel online first. His social media was minimal but not invisible, and from what I could piece together, he worked in landscape architecture, had a small apartment in the city and seemed to live quietly. No obvious wealth, no signs of the kind of ambition that might explain why he'd brought a lawyer to our parents' house 3 weeks after a funeral. I told myself I was doing research. I told myself it was necessary intelligence gathering. I tracked when he went to the probate attorney's office by watching for check-ins and tagged locations. I drove past his apartment building once on a Tuesday evening, parked half a block down, and watched the lit windows for 20 minutes before I made myself drive away. That was the moment I should have recognized what I was becoming. I did not recognize it. I told myself I was being thorough. Then Lorraine came to the house on a Wednesday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, and she told me the rest. "How long did you know?" I asked her. "About Gabriel or about Carol?" "Either, both." Lorraine looked at the table. "I found out about Carol when your father and I had dinner maybe 14 years ago. He told me he'd made a terrible mistake and he didn't know how to get out of it. I told him he needed to end it. He said he would." "And you never said anything to Mom?" "He told me he would handle it." "He didn't handle it. He handled it so well that there are deeds and bank accounts and a 32-year-old man showing up with a lawyer." "I know," Lorraine said. Her voice was very small. You sat at Mom's funeral 3 weeks ago and you cried and you hugged me and you knew this whole time. Elena, I didn't know about the will changes, I didn't know about the deed, I thought he'd ended it years ago. But you knew there was a son. The silence told me she had. Get out, I said. Elena. I mean it, Lorraine, get out of this house right now, I cannot look at you. She went. The mug of tea sat on the table getting cold for a long time after. I stood in the kitchen and felt something I couldn't name moving through me like cold water, filling up all the spaces where trust used to be. Owen's reaction to Lorraine's confession was different from mine. Where I went colder, he went louder. He called me 3 times that night, leaving voicemails that escalated from upset to furious to something that sounded almost like a person breaking apart. By the time I called him back, he was past the rage stage and into the hollow quiet that I recognized as dangerous for him specifically. We should just sell, he said. Sell the whole thing, split it 3 ways including Gabriel, and be done with it. We are not selling. We're going to lose it all to legal fees if we fight this. I am not selling Mom and Dad's house to a stranger, Owen. Gabriel's not a stranger, that's the whole problem, he's apparently our brother. Don't call him that. Elena, the DNA is what it is. He is not my brother, I said, and my voice came out with an edge that surprised even me. He is someone who is claiming a piece of what we are owed, and I am going to make sure he doesn't get it. What I devised was not, in retrospect, a plan so much as a pressure campaign. I had found inconsistencies in the timeline of the estate changes, places where the paperwork seemed hurried, where signatures were dated close to the period when our father's cognitive decline had been at its most pronounced. I selected the most damaging-looking documents, the ones that could be read if you squinted and had good reason to want to, as evidence of undue influence. Then I reached out quietly to 3 of our father's oldest friends and our one surviving uncle, sharing the documents with a framing that suggested Gabriel or his mother might have pressured our father in his final year. I told myself it was just information. I told myself I was just letting people draw their own conclusions. Within 2 weeks, our uncle had called Gabriel's mother Carol and told her the family believed she had manipulated a dying man. 2 of our father's friends had spoken to each other and agreed it seemed suspicious. The narrative was spreading through the extended family like a slow stain. Gabriel called me. Elena, it's Gabriel Mercer. I think we need to talk privately, not through lawyers. I don't think that's necessary. I think it is, please. We met at a coffee shop midway between his apartment and the house. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his hands around a cup of coffee, and he looked like a man who had not been sleeping well. He looked actually like I felt, which I hated. You've been talking to people, he said, spreading a story that my mother manipulated your father. I shared documents with family members who have a right to know about the estate. You know that's not what you did. I looked at him. What do you want, Gabriel? He leaned forward, his voice was very quiet and very steady. I want you to know that I didn't know your father was my biological father until 6 months ago. My mother told me because he asked her to tell me. He was trying to find a way to bring everyone together before he died. That's a convenient story. It's the truth. I have texts between him and my mother that go back 18 months. He was trying to figure out how to tell you and Owen. He was terrified of hurting you. He kept postponing it. His jaw tight. He was a coward, I know that. I'm not here to defend him, but I'm not a predator either. I'm just someone who got information about my own father 6 months ago and has been trying to figure out what to do with it. I looked at him for a long time. The coffee shop was warm and smelled like dark roast and cinnamon, and Gabriel Mercer sat across from me looking like the most inconvenient thing that had ever happened to me, which was that he was clearly telling the truth. I almost said something, I almost said several things. What came out instead was, I'll see you at the mediation. I left, I drove home. I sat in the driveway of my parents' house for 20 minutes in the dark, and for the first time in weeks I let myself feel something other than strategy. It felt like standing in a field after a storm, everything flattened, nothing left to hide behind. Then my phone rang. It was Douglas Park, my probate attorney. Elena, I need you to come in tomorrow. There's been a development with the estate. What kind of development? Several items protected under probate inventory appear to be missing. The revolver your father owned and a number of heirlooms that were listed in the initial filing. Do you have any knowledge of where they are? I sat very still. No, I said, I don't. But I had a terrible feeling I knew who did. Owen met me at a diner the next morning looking like a man who had already decided to be defensive about something he hadn't been asked yet. The revolver is gone, Owen. He looked out the window. Owen, look at me. I needed money. You sold estate property while we're in active probate. I said I needed money. The collectors there were some situations I needed to take care of. Alina, you don't know what kind of pressure I've been under. I know exactly what kind of pressure you've been under because I've been watching you dig this hole for 4 years. My voice was shaking. I pressed my hands flat on the table to steady them. Do you understand that the court can charge you with a crime? Do you understand what you've just done to our position in this case? I'll pay it back. With what money, Owen? I'll figure it out. You have never once in your life figured it out. You always get to the edge of it and then you call me and I'm the one who figures it out while you move on to the next disaster. The diner went quiet around us. An elderly couple 2 tables over pretended to study their menus. Owen stared at the table, his hands were shaking. I know, he said very quietly. I know that, I know what I do and I can't seem to stop doing it and I hate myself for it. The anger went out of me like air from a balloon. I sat there looking at my little brother, 29 years old and so much smaller than I needed him to be, and I felt it again, that terrible cold water moving through me. But this time it was grief, not rage. Grief for the brother he might have been, for the family we might have been. For the father who had apparently been quietly trying to fix the catastrophe of his own making while his children were falling apart around him, and he hadn't told any of them what he was trying to do. Rehab, I said. Alina. After this is done, you go to rehab. That's not a suggestion. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He looked out the window at the gray November street and I think somewhere under all the defense mechanisms he was saying yes. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday in mid-December. Mina Torres had arranged the space, a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking streets wet with winter rain. The city looked cold and blurred like something seen through grief. I arrived early and sat at the table with my box of documents and my stomach in knots, watching the room fill up. Owen came in looking like he hadn't slept. He sat beside me and didn't speak for several minutes. Gabriel arrived with Mina Torres, who sat across the table with the professional blankness I'd come to associate with her, and took out her legal pad. Our attorney Douglas Park sat to my right, already shuffling papers. The silence in the room had texture. You could feel everyone deciding how to begin. I was the one who opened the box. Before we start the formal process, I said, I want to read something. Mina Torres looked at Douglas Park. He shrugged slightly. Alina, Owen said uncertain. Just let me do this. I pulled out the first letter. It was dated 4 years ago, written in our father's careful script on the yellow legal pad paper he'd always preferred. I cleared my throat and began to read. I have been a coward for 19 years. I want to write that plainly because I have spent 19 years finding more elegant ways to say it, and none of them have made it more true or less shameful. I loved Carol. I loved Alina and Owen's mother. I could not find the courage to choose, so I chose nothing and called it love for both families, and it was neither. It was selfishness wearing love's clothing. Owen made a sound beside me. I kept reading. Letter after letter, moving through the stack slowly, reading the ones that cut deepest, the ones about guilt and postponed confessions and the specific fear our father had named directly, which was that if he told us the truth, we would see clearly what kind of man he actually was, and he couldn't bear our clear sight. He had preferred our blind love. He had kept us blind to preserve his own comfort. And now he was dying and he was running out of time to fix it, and he was terrified. The last letter I read was dated 11 days before his death. I have asked Carol to tell Gabriel. I am going to tell Alina and Owen next week. I want to bring them all to the house. I want to sit them in the same room and be honest for the first time and let them scream at me if they need to, and then I want to see if any of them can find it in themselves to know each other. I do not deserve that mercy, but I am going to ask for it anyway because I have nothing left to hide behind. The room was very quiet. Then Owen slammed his hands on the table. This is his fault, Owen said, and his voice broke on the last word. All of it is his fault. He built a lie so big it swallowed our whole lives, and then he died before he could clean it up, and now we're sitting here in a lawyer's office trying to divide up what's left of a family he already destroyed before we even knew it. Owen, I started. Don't tell me to calm down. Don't manage me right now, Alina. I am not a situation to be managed. I am your brother and I am telling you that I am furious and I am heartbroken and I don't know how to be both at once." Across the table, Gabriel's jaw was tight. He had been completely still while I read. Now something was moving behind his eyes, and it was the kind of movement you see in water just before it starts to boil. "You want to talk about what you lost," Gabriel said. His voice was very quiet and very controlled in the way that things are controlled right before they stop being controlled. "You want to talk about growing up with a father who showed up some weekends and then didn't. A father I made excuses for my entire childhood because my mother told me he was complicated, he was busy, he was doing his best. You want to talk about loss. You had him every single day. You had Christmas mornings and dinner tables and someone to call when things went wrong." His voice had been rising steadily and now it cracked just once, just slightly, like a hairline fracture in something that had been under pressure for a very long time. "You had a father. I had a man who visited." "We didn't know about you," I said. "I know that, but you had him and I didn't, and now I'm sitting here being treated like I'm the villain of a story I didn't write." "I spread rumors about you," I said. He looked at me. "I went to family members and I framed documents in a way that suggested your mother might have manipulated Dad at the end of his life. That was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I did it anyway because I was so afraid of losing the house that I stopped thinking about you as a person and turned you into a problem to solve." Owen stared at me. Mina Torres had stopped writing. "Why are you telling me this?" Gabriel asked. "Because I have spent my entire life managing things so they don't fall apart, and I managed so hard and so wrong that I made everything worse, and because you deserved better from me than what I gave you." I looked down at the box of letters. "He deserved to tell us himself. He ran out of time, that's the cruelest part. He was going to tell us. He was a coward for 19 years and then he found some courage at the very end and he didn't make it." Gabriel pressed his hand over his eyes for a moment. "I don't want a war," he said finally. "I never wanted a war. I wanted to know my father and I was too late for that, and now I'm trying to figure out what any of this is worth without him in it." Owen exhaled slowly. He sounded like a building settling after something structural had given way. "I sold the revolver," Owen said. "And some of the heirlooms. I need to tell you that. I needed money and I made a bad choice, and I am aware that is not something I can fix with a sentence, but I need to say it anyway." Mina Torres and Douglas Park exchanged a look that was purely professional alarm. "We can address that separately," Douglas Park said carefully. "I know," Owen said. "I just needed to say it out loud to the person I actually wronged." The mediation did not end with handshakes. It ended with exhaustion and paperwork and the particular silence of people who have said true things and cannot take them back. But before Mina Torres called a recess, I said what I had decided somewhere between reading the last letter and watching Gabriel press his hand over his eyes. "I'm going to agree to sell the house." Owen looked at me. "Elena." "Not because I'm giving up, because I understand now that keeping it would mean preserving a lie. The house isn't what I thought it was. None of it is what I thought it was, and I can't spend the rest of my life living inside something built on a foundation I didn't know was rotten." Gabriel said, "You don't have to do that on my account." "I'm not doing it on your account. I'm doing it because I need to stop trying to hold together something that was already broken before I started holding." The house sold 4 months later in the first days of spring to a young couple who walked through every room with the stunned happiness of people who do not yet know all the things a house can hold. I stood at the end of the driveway and watched them shake the realtor's hand and tried to feel something clean. I mostly felt tired. The money was divided according to the will and the deed amendment. Gabriel received his share. Owen received his. I received mine. Douglas Park handled the transfer efficiently and without drama, which was the only part of the whole process that went the way I expected anything to go. Owen checked himself into a residential program in February, 2 weeks after the mediation, without me asking him again. He called me the night before he went in and said, "I'm going," and I said, "Okay," and neither of us said the other things we meant, which were that we loved each other and were terrified for each other and had been carrying more of each other's weight than we had ever acknowledged in both directions. Lorraine reached out once by email in January. I read the email twice and then filed it without responding. I was not ready. I did not know if I would ever be ready. What she had done by staying silent was a different shape of betrayal than what my father had done, but it was still betrayal, and I needed more time to understand how to hold both the person and the thing they'd done in the same thought without one canceling out the other. Gabriel and I exchanged a few brief emails over the following months. Nothing profound, administrative things mostly. questions about estate paperwork and a piece of furniture that had been misattributed. But once in March, he sent me a photograph I hadn't seen before. It was a picture of our father at a fishing lake holding up a fish with an expression of pure delighted embarrassment. Gabriel had written under it, "Found this in my mom's storage, thought you might want it." I stared at it for a long time. My father looked happy and foolish and completely unguarded in a way I had almost never seen him look in my own childhood, and I did not know whether to feel grateful to Gabriel for sending it or devastated that this version of my father had existed somewhere out of my sight. I saved the photograph. I did not write back for 3 days. When I did, I wrote, "Thank you," and then after a moment's hesitation, "He looks like himself in this one." Gabriel wrote back, "Yeah, he does." I found the envelope on a rainy Thursday evening in April, 8 months after the safe had been found and everything had come apart. I had been unpacking the last box from the house into my small apartment, a two-bedroom on the fourth floor of a building I had chosen specifically for its lack of history, nothing in it but what I had brought, and I had reached into the box for what I thought was a stack of documents, and my hand had found instead a plain white envelope tucked beneath them, unsealed, with nothing written on the outside. Inside was a photograph. It was printed on regular printer paper, slightly blurry the way home-printed photos always are, and it showed 4 people standing in front of a fireplace. My father was in the center, smiling. Owen was on one side of him, laughing at something off camera, caught in the middle of a gesture. I was on the other side, my expression caught between amusement and one of my more typical attempts at composed control. And beside Owen, slightly turned as if he had been mid-conversation, was Gabriel Mercer. All 4 of us together. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, he had written a date. It was 7 days before he died. 7 days. He had printed this photograph 7 days before he died, which meant he had already done it, had already found a way to get us in the same room, had already taken the picture, had already been holding what must have felt like the first moment of an honest life, and none of us had known. Owen and I had no memory of Gabriel being there. Gabriel, when I texted him a photo of the photograph the next morning, wrote back within minutes, "I don't remember this either. I don't know when this was taken." Which meant our father had done something with a photo editor, or had layered images, or had created something that didn't exist yet, the family he hadn't managed to build but had already imagined clearly enough to make it visible on paper. He had been planning, he had been trying, he had run out of time by 7 days. I sat on the floor of my apartment with the photograph in my hands and the rain against the window, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't done since the morning of my mother's funeral, when I had stood in the bathroom for 6 minutes before the service and let myself break open and then put myself back together and gone out and started organizing flowers. I cried for my father, who was a coward and a man who had finally, too late, decided to be brave. I cried for my mother, who had loved a man who was living double. I cried for Owen, who was in a facility somewhere trying to learn how to stop burning his own life down. I cried for Gabriel, who had grown up with a father who visited sometimes and then didn't. I cried for myself, for all the years of managing and controlling and organizing grief instead of feeling it, for all the ways I had tried to hold everything together and had held it wrong, had held it so hard I left marks on it. I thought about control, about how I had believed for most of my life that managing things was the same as caring for them. I thought about how I had looked at Gabriel Mercer and seen a threat instead of a person, because turning him into a problem was easier than sitting with the grief of what my father had done. I thought about how I had spread rumors that could have damaged an innocent man's reputation, had done it deliberately and efficiently, using the same organizational skills I applied to flower arrangements and medication schedules, and had told myself it was strategy instead of cruelty. I thought about my mother, who had organized her own grief in her own way, and whether she had known something she hadn't admitted to herself, and whether there was a kind of understanding that passes between people without words when something is wrong in the architecture of a life. I would never know. She was gone, and she had taken that with her. Gabriel received his portion of the estate in May. 2 weeks later, through Douglas Park, I received a short letter from Gabriel's attorney noting that Gabriel had made a charitable donation in our father's name to the hospice facility that had cared for him in his last months. He had not told me directly. I had to decide what to do with that information, what it meant about who he was versus who I had decided he was when he first appeared in that doorway with a lawyer at his side. I thought it meant he was someone trying to find a way to grieve a person he had never fully had, the same way I was trying to grieve a person I had thought I fully knew. We were doing the same work from opposite directions, and we had been too locked into our positions to see that until a room full of lawyers and years of hidden letters had finally broken us both open at the same time. I pinned the photograph to the wall above my desk in the small apartment. The blurry, imagined family, All four of us together in a moment that never technically happened, built from my father's quiet hope that he might still tell the truth in time. He almost did. He was 7 days short of almost. And I have learned in the months since that almost is not nothing. Almost is a person who was trying. Almost is a photograph printed and kept in a hidden envelope for the children who would find it after everything fell apart. Almost is the distance between who my father was and who he was working to become. And I have learned to hold that distance without needing to collapse it in either direction, without turning him into a villain to justify my anger or a saint to justify my grief. He was a frightened man who loved people imperfectly and kept secrets that cost everyone around him enormously, and he spent the last year of his life trying to pay the debt. He didn't make it. The debt remains. We are all, in our various ways, still paying it. Owen called me on a Wednesday in June from the facility, sounding like himself for the first time in what felt like years. He said, "I want to try to be better." I said, "Me too." He said, "Do you think we'll figure it out?" I said, "I don't know, but I think we'll stop pretending we already have." He laughed, and it sounded real, and I stayed on the phone longer than I intended, just listening to him talk, not trying to manage the conversation or steer it anywhere, just letting it go where it went. That, I think, is the thing I am learning, how to let things be what they are instead of what I need them to be. It is the hardest thing I have ever tried to do, harder than the probate filing, harder than the mediation, harder than reading my father's letters aloud in a cold conference room to the son he never acknowledged and the brother who had spent months secretly selling what wasn't his to sell. Harder than standing in the driveway of the house I grew up in and watching strangers walk through it like it's theirs because it is now, and that is what letting go looks like from the outside. From the inside, it feels like freefall. But you keep falling and you don't hit the ground you expected, and eventually you start to think that what you mistook for freefall might be something else entirely. Might be the first time in a very long time you have stopped trying to hold yourself up and just let yourself be held by whatever is actually there. The photograph stays on the wall, the family that never happened but almost did, the reminder that almost can be the beginning of something if you survive the fall first.